Hey everybody, today's video is about the Beatles album A Hard Day's Night and 10 facts you maybe didn't know about this album. Once again, I have notes, so let's get started right now. So this album was released in 1964, and of course this is also has the same title as the Beatles' first film, A Hard Day's Night, and all the songs on side one of this album were in the movie A Hard Day's Night. And of course, A Hard Day's Night, if you haven't seen it, it's an excellent, excellent movie, arguably the best movie the Beatles made. It's just really, really a lot of fun to watch. So if you haven't seen A Hard Day's Night, definitely check it out. But let's get into the facts here for A Hard Day's Night. And of course, like all of the early Beatles albums, it has a stereo mix and a mono mix, which we will be talking about in the facts. But let's get started. So fact number one. And this has to do with the title of the album, A Hard Day's Night, which is also the title of the film of the same name. Now, interestingly enough, for the whole time they were filming the movie, they didn't have a title at all. They had like a working title, just Beatles 1 or Beatles Movie or whatever. So they didn't have a title, and they were kind of waiting for John and Paul to come up with a song that could be the title song for the movie and the album. And John is the one who came up with it, and it's based off of something that Ringo said. Now, here's a quote from John, and the quote from John is, "I was going home in the car, and Dick Lester, who was the director of the film, suggested the title A Hard Day's Night from something Ringo had said. I had used it in his own right, but it was an off-the-cuff remark by Ringo. You know, one of those malapropisms, a Ringoism, where he says it not to be funny, he just said it. So then Dick Lester said, we're going to use that as the title." Now, what John is referring to here, in his own right, is John's first book that he wrote. It's a book of poetry and wordplay and short stories that John put together, and little drawings as well. Fantastic book in his own right. And in that book, he used the phrase Hard Day's Night that Ringo had said. He used that for the first time in the book. And then Dick Lester, the director, I guess, picked it up from the book and said this is a good title, and because of that, said this is going to be the title of the film. So that's how the name Hard Day's Night came up. Now, in another fact, we will talk about the writing of the song A Hard Day's Night, because that's interesting as well. But let's move on now to fact number two. Fact number two is that this is the only Beatles album that's made up of entirely Lennon-McCartney songs. Every single song on this album is a Lennon-McCartney song, and that didn't happen ever again with the Beatles album, which is kind of crazy to think about. They got close with Sgt. Pepper. Sgt. Pepper has all Lennon-McCartney songs except for Within You Without You, which of course is written by George Harrison. But Hard Day's Night is the only one that every single song is Lennon-McCartney. Now, of course, George does sing a song on Hard Day's Night. He sings I'm Happy Just to Dance With You. But that song was written by John, especially for George to sing. So it's a Lennon-McCartney song. So all Lennon-McCartney songs on A Hard Day's Night. And of course, it's a fantastic album. Some of the best early Beatles songwriting on this album. It's pretty much a perfect early Beatles album, in my opinion. Every single song is great. Fact number three. This is one of three Beatles albums that does not have a lead vocal from Ringo on it, which is kind of crazy to think about, because when you think of a Beatles album, there's always a spot for Ringo to sing a song. That's just always how it is. But yet, on A Hard Day's Night, he does not have a lead vocal at all, which is kind of weird. And the other two albums that don't have a Ringo vocal are Magical Mystery Tour, which was, of course, an EP, and then, of course, a US album as well. But again, no Ringo lead vocals on there. Ringo does sing on the song Flying. You can hear him la-la-laing in there. And then the other album is the Beatles' Let It Be album. No Ringo vocal on there as well. So only three albums that don't have Ringo. Hard Day's Night, Magical Mystery Tour, and Let It Be. Kind of odd. Okay, fact number four. So this is back to the actual song A Hard Day's Night. So A Hard Day's Night, John basically wrote the song overnight because Dick Lester had told him, okay, the title of the film is going to be A Hard Day's Night. We need a song called A Hard Day's Night. So John went away, wrote the song. The next morning, there was a journalist named Maureen Cleave, who was like a friend of the Beatles, She went to pick up John to take him to either the studio or to the film set. I don't really know. But she has a great quote talking about when she picked up John this next morning after he'd written the song. So here's her quote. She said, "One day I picked John up in a taxi and took him to Abbey Road for a recording session. The tune to the song A Hard Day's Night was in his head with the words scrawled on the back of a birthday card from a fan to his little son Julian. And the lyrics were, 'When I get home to you, I find my tiredness is through.' And she said, 'This is rather a feeble line about tiredness,' I said. He said, 'Okay.' And he cheerfully borrowed my pen and instantly changed it to the slightly suggestive lines, 'When I get home to you, I find the things that you do will make me feel all right.'" So John just there and then changed the lyric based off of this Maureen Cleave, this reporter, saying, she didn't really like that lyric about how when I get home to you, I find my tiredness is through, which is kind of a hard line to say anyway. So John just changed it then and there in the taxi ride to the recording session, which is kind of wild to think about. So it's kind of amazing. It's just goes to show you how much of a genius John Lennon was. The fact that he, the night before the director of the film said, "We're going to call the film A Hard Day's Night," John, that very night, wrote the song A Hard Day's Night, and then the next morning was still kind of working on it when they brought it to the studio, and then they just recorded it there and then, and it became the absolute, well, first of all, it was a #1 hit single, and then it was a hit film and a hit album. That song became just so important to the whole Hard Day's Night album and film. So John just wrote it, no problem at all. So he's just an absolute genius. I don't have to tell you that. Everyone in the world knows that John Lennon and Paul McCartney and George Harrison and even Ringo, maybe, geniuses. So just kind of amazing how quickly John could work like that. Fact number 5. This is kind of interesting to note. So the song A Hard Day's Night, the title song of the film, isn't even performed by the Beatles in the film. In fact, it opens up the film, and it's just the recording of the song A Hard Day's Night, and it shows the Beatles running around, like running away from the fans, running into the train station, and the famous scene where Paul has the mustache on, and he takes the mustache off, and they end up getting on the train. That's to the song A Hard Day's Night. But other than that, the Beatles never actually performed the song A Hard Day's Night in the film. And there's a reason for that. That's because the song was written so late, and it was written after they'd filmed all these scenes, that the only way the song could be in the film is just if the recording was played over the Beatles during that running scene. So kind of interesting to note that the actual Hard Day's Night song isn't even performed in the film. Kind of weird. Okay, fact number 6. So this is the only Beatles album that has a song that was recorded outside of the UK. All the other Beatles songs were recorded in the UK, and in London, actually, specifically. Of course, they weren't all recorded at Abbey Road Studios. A lot of the songs were recorded, by the way, I'm not talking about songs from A Hard Day's Night, I'm talking about the Beatles songs in their whole career. They recorded at other studios like Trident and Olympic and lots of other studios. But they only recorded one song outside of the UK, and that song appears on A Hard Day's Night, and that song is Cant Buy Me Love. So Cant Buy Me Love was recorded in Paris, and it was recorded actually kind of as an afterthought. So while the Beatles were in Paris, their record company EMI and their German affiliate wanted them to record 2 of their hit songs in German. So they recorded She Loves You and I Want to Hold Your Hand in German in Paris. So George Martin flew out to Paris to meet up with the Beatles, and they ended up recording those 2 songs in German. But then after they were done recording those 2 songs, they decided to record a brand new song that Paul McCartney and I guess John Lennon also helped with it. They'd just written called Cant Buy Me Love. So they recorded the backing track to Cant Buy Me Love in Paris. They then took that backing track back to EMI, Abbey Road Studios in London, and added some overdubs, like the guitar solo, in fact, is an overdub that was added at Abbey Road. And during the guitar solo, by the way, you can hear the original guitar solo that George recorded in Paris. You can hear it faintly in the background there. So next time you listen to Cant Buy Me Love and during the solo, listen in the background. You can hear like stray kind of guitar notes coming out. And those are the original guitar solo notes from the Paris sessions that they recorded Cant Buy Me Love at. So interesting to kind of note that the one song they recorded outside of the UK is on A Hard Day's Night. Fact number 7. So there is a longer version of I'll Cry Instead, the amazing John Lennon song, which appears on side 2. There's a longer version of that appears on the US soundtrack album for A Hard Day's Night and the US album Something New. And this longer version it's a mono mix of I'll Cry Instead, and it lasts 2 minutes and 9 seconds compared to what I call the standard version on the UK editions. And that version is only 1 minute 49 seconds. So what did they cut from the UK version that they left in the US version? Well, what it is it's a third verse, and that last verse there. And I actually like the longer version of I'll Cry Instead because it's still a short song, even at 2 minutes and 9 seconds. That's a very, very short song. So if you want to hear the longer version of I'll Cry Instead, you can only find it on the US versions of either the Hard Day's Night soundtrack or the US album Something New. And it's only a mono mix, by the way. If it says it's stereo, it's actually just fake stereo. So if you listen to Something New, the stereo version of Something New from the US, that's just fake stereo for I'll Cry Instead. So listen to the mono version. So that was fact number 7 about I'll Cry Instead, which, by the way, side note, I'll Cry Instead is one of my favorite John Lennon songs. It's such a weird song, in my opinion. It's this like totally country western type song from John, and there's just something about it that's really magical. I've always loved that song. So there you go. My own personal opinion thrown into these facts. Maybe you don't want it. I don't know. There it is. Okay, fact number 8. You Cant Do That, which is a fantastic song on side 2. It's the very first song that George ever used his Rickenbacker 12-string guitar on for a Beatles recording session. So this 12-string electric guitar that George got from Rickenbacker, he got it in the U.S. when the Beatles were on tour in the U.S. Rickenbacker came to George's room and gave him this Rickenbacker guitar. Actually, it was when he was sick, I believe, while they were working on the Ed Sullivan Show. George was sick in his room, and Rickenbacker brought him this brand new 12-string electric guitar. And I think it was actually only the second guitar Rickenbacker ever made as far as electric 12-string goes. They gave it to George. George fell in love with it, loved the guitar. As soon as they got back from America, they started working on songs for the album A Hard Day's Night, and You Cant Do That was the first song they worked on, and George immediately used this 12-string Rickenbacker. Now, of course, the 12-string Rickenbacker is really the signature sound of A Hard Day's Night, in my opinion. You hear it from the very first opening chord. That is the 12-string Rickenbacker with, of course, John's Rickenbacker guitar and Paul's bass. And I think there's also a piano chord by George Martin on there too. But it's the very first sound you hear, the definitive sound of A Hard Day's Night. So that guitar was just so important to the Beatles in general and specifically A Hard Day's Night. So yes, the Rickenbacker 12-string, the first time George used it was on You Cant Do That, and it's excellent, by the way, as well. That lead guitar part is really cool, the main lick. I should mention, though, the lead guitar solo on You Cant Do That is played by John, which is kind of interesting to note as well. So go check that out as well. Fact number 9. Okay, so like all of the early Beatles albums, there is a stereo mix, which happens to be this record, and a mono mix, which happens to be this record. And this happens to be an original early 1964 UK mono pressing of the album. This is my own personal copy, which I treasure. It is absolutely beaten up. It plays okay, a lot of surface noise, but I love it because it's cool to have an original mono, UK mono Beatles album. So I treasure it. So this is the mono mix and a stereo mix. Now as usual, there's quite a bit of differences when it comes to the stereo and the mono mixes of each of the songs. But the biggest difference, that I think so, is a song called If I Fell. If I Fell is a fantastic ballad that John and Paul sing together. It's on side 1, and it also appears in the film. But on the stereo mix of If I Fell, Paul's voice cracks during one of the parts of the song. And I'm not going to sing the part, but you will hear it in the song. So in the stereo mix, you can hear Paul's voice kind of crack, and it almost sounds like he's like laughing or something as well after his voice cracks. But in the mono mix, his voice does not crack. So the mono mix is kind of what I would call a cleaner performance. Stereo mix, while it still sounds fantastic and it's still great, has that voice cracking of Paul's, which is kind of weird. So stereo, mono mix. By the way, Hard Day's Night, the stereo and the mono mix are both worth owning, in my opinion. I think the stereo mix is really, really good, really strong for Hard Day's Night, and the mono mix is excellent as well. So both are worth owning for sure. Okay, the last fact number 10. So when I do these videos, I always try to include other songs that the Beatles were either working on at the time of the album or had written at the time of the album that didn't end up making it to the album. So with this song, it's a little bit of a stretch because this song was obviously written for somebody else. It was not intended to be on a Beatles album, but this song was written around the exact same time period that songs for Hard Day's Night were being written and recorded. So this song is a song called It's For You, which Paul wrote for Cilla Black. Cilla Black was managed by Brian Epstein, the Beatles manager. And she was also a friend of the Beatles. She actually worked at the Cavern Club, and I believe the Beatles were the ones who pushed her in the direction of Brian Epstein. And she went on, of course, to have a fantastic career as a singer and also as a television host later on. But in 1964, Paul wrote this song, It's For You, for Cilla Black, and I think John may have helped a little bit as well. And he wrote it right around the time period that he was writing songs for Hard Day's Night. And in my opinion, It's For You has a very, very similar feel to a lot of Paul's songs that he was writing around this time, like And I Love Her and even Things We Said Today. It has that kind of melancholy 1964 vibe to the songwriting, and It's For You definitely matches those two songs in my opinion. It's For You, by the way, is a really, really good song that I think if the Beatles would have done an arrangement of it, kind of in the And I Love Her type of vein, it would have fit perfectly on the album. And in fact, it recently just came to light that Paul McCartney recorded a demo for Cilla Black of the song It's For You, and 20 seconds of this song have leaked online. So on YouTube now, you can hear Paul singing the first 20 seconds of this demo for Cilla, and it's Paul playing piano and singing it, and it's totally worth checking out. So highly recommend looking up Paul McCartney It's For You demo. It's very, very cool, worth checking out. And in addition to that, there's this band called the Beatniks who recorded an album of all of the songs that Lennon and McCartney wrote for other artists, and they redid those songs in a Beatle-y type arrangement. So if the Beatles would have done those songs, how they would have recorded them. And they do a great, great version of It's For You. So that's also worth checking out. So look up Beatniks, It's For You. Fantastic as well. So those are 10 facts from the Beatles album Hard Day's Night that maybe you didn't know about. Maybe you knew every single one of those facts, and now you're thinking, I watched this whole video and I already knew all that stuff. Well, if you did know that stuff, I hope the video was at least entertaining. And maybe there are some of you out there who didn't know any of these facts. You only knew a couple of them, and now you have some more knowledge when it comes to Hard Day's Night by the Beatles. By the way, my hands are really moving around a lot today. I don't know what that's about, but it just is. Oh, and before I'm done, I have to just do one thing. Cool, 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 cool. You know who you are. Anyway, that's it for now. And by the way, don't forget to go to my website, needlemeetsvinyl.com, where I have all kinds of records on there, fantastic records that you will absolutely love, that sound amazing. And tomorrow I have a fantastic record hitting the website, Derek and the Dominoes' Layla album. I've been working on it for such a long time, and I finally got an amazing pressing that will be hitting the website. And of course, more Beatles albums coming up next week as well, so stay tuned. And that's it for now. So bye for now. Cool.